Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the podcast. This is the Little Peak podcast. My name's Heather Dorr, and I'm the founder of Little Peak Press. We make books and review books inspired by mountains and wild places. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by Nandini Purandare and Deepa Balsavar to discuss their book. I'll show you it. Headstrap, Legends and Lore from the Climbing Sherpas of Darjeeling. So this came out earlier this year. It's a brilliant read. I really enjoyed it, and Deepa and Nandini have kindly joined me today to discuss it. So I'm going to ask a few questions and we'll have a discussion about the book. Let's crack on. So, but before that, Nandini, could you please introduce yourself and Deepa after?
So I'm Nandini Purandare. I edit the Himalayan Journal, which is one of the most comprehensive journals on the Himalaya, I think worldwide. And I also am currently president of the Himalayan Club, and I write on the mountains, the Indian Himalaya, and just worked for the last 10 years on this book called Headstrap, along with Deepa. Deepa will introduce herself. We could have done it to each other.
Yeah, so I'm Deepa Balsavar. Nandini and I have known each other since I think the early 1990s, and we've worked on educational projects together, developing material for low-income schools. I'm also by profession, I'm an illustrator and a writer. I do primarily children's books, and I also teach communication design at the Indian Institute of Technology. That's my introduction.
Thank you both. So that's great. So I've got a few questions to ask you. So I'll start. So Nandini first. Can you tell me some more about Headstrap, please?
Headstrap is the result of a 10-year-long project, in which Deepa and I recorded the oral histories of the Sherpas, specifically of Darjeeling in India, where they moved because the expeditions in those days, at the turn of the 20th century, took off from. So Darjeeling was the hub of mountaineering activity during those days, and the Sherpas happened to come to Darjeeling in order to get work. We decided to embark on this project because we realized it was a gap in the historical recording of these expeditions. There were many accounts by Western climbers, but there was no account on the people who lived in Darjeeling, started their lives there, and went to the mountains, mostly Everest in those days. So Deepa and I decided to fill in this gap. I just have to say, the result of which is the book Headstrap. We culled out stories from the oral history project and put them together, tried to weave them as much as we could in order to make a book. The project itself has much more material, which is available on audio and video, but the book is a result of that project. As we go on, we'll have much more to say about how and what the book is about. But
thank you.
Yes.
And Deepa, I mean, Nandini's just sort of talked about the drive you both had to make the book. But the way you made it was very, was the way you collected the oral histories of the Sherpas. Can you explain what drove you to do it in that way and over such an extensive period and in so much detail, please?
Well, the first time we went to Darjeeling was 2012. when we went there for the first death anniversary of Nawangumbu, who was the second person to climb Everest, to summit Everest, and with a Sherpa, and we went there. And when we went there, we were completely clueless. We knew nobody. We didn't speak. I mean, we spoke Hindi, but we didn't speak Nepali. And uh, our information about the Sherpas, despite being Indians and them being part of India, was very, very scanty and sketchy. But that first fortnight that we spent introduced us to so many people that we had no inkling about, and gave us a first taste of stories that was so compelling and fascinating that it became a promise, I think, that we made to ourselves, and something that we decided that we had to follow through with, and led us to go there. So over a period of about 8 years, till COVID, till 2019, we were going there perhaps twice a year, uh, for 15 days at a time or 20 days at a time. We had no funds. There was nobody sponsoring the whole project. We did write a few applications, but nobody seemed interested enough, or maybe we were just not academic enough to know how to write these proposals. So we cobbled together the materials. We got cameras on loan, tripod on loan. We actually had to take lessons on how to videotape interviews. We had to learn how to interview people, and how to take oral histories. But and of course, we had our own jobs here and we had our families. But we had decided that from Mumbai, we would go as often as we could, because it was the people, it was the Sherpas and the families that we met that I think um, led us uh, to sort of, it was almost unspoken. I don't think either of us had even a second's doubt that this was something that we wouldn't complete.
Thank you. Moving on to my next question, in Deepa, can you, I mean, the book tells extensive stories of the Darjeeling Sherpas, their background and how they actually came to be in Darjeeling. Can you tell me a little more about that, please?
So right up till 1947, when India got independence from England, uh, India was part of the crown. It was first ruled over large parts of it by what was known as the East India Company, which was a trading company, a British trading company, which came to India in 1600 actually, to trade. And then they amassed huge amounts of wealth and power for themselves. They had their own government. And right up until what was the first Indian War of Independence, which took place in 1857. After that, power slowly started shifting from the company to the British crown, and the government took over, and it was they took over not only the country and the resources and the revenue, but also the administration that had been set in place by the company. At the turn of the 20th century, the end decades of the 19th century, India had already been mapped by the British. They had calculated the length and breadth of the land, and had also mapped the height of the mountains. And very soon, the the people who wanted to climb and explore, the explorers, the shikaris for big game hunting, they started coming to the Himalaya in order to pursue their interests. And they needed people to help them carry loads up. And in those days, mind you, when the British went up the mountains, they took all their creature comforts with them. So they needed vast retinues of porters and pack mules and horses, and the local cows, in order to transport the yaks, to transport their stuff. and they soon found that it was the hill people who were best suited for climbing at altitude. At first, they would employ people from the villages along the way. But by the turn of the century, Darjeeling had already become established as a place where people migrated for two reasons. One was the tea gardens. The British established tea gardens in order to have an alternative supply of tea rather than depending on China. And the second thing was it was developed as a hill station for recuperation of British soldiers. And then also it was a place where families started staying the year round. So so people started migrating to Darjeeling in search of work, and along with the various other tribes and communities that came, so also came people from Nepal, the Sherpas and the Bhotias, who were the people from Tibet. And it was among these people that the first explorers and climbers found their support staff, found the people who would carry loads for them. So that is the group that finally emerged as the Sherpas, who went along on every expedition from from the time of Alexander Kelas and all that, from 1907.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really detailed and extensive answer. Thank you for that. And Nandini, you know, and we've already touched on it. You've already touched on it. Well, the Sherpas are best known, you know, in the West at least. You know, is the skilled supporters of Western-led mountaineering expeditions, and you've already mentioned that. But was this your jumping-off point for the book? You know, I mean, because you know, Deepa's just described a very rich history and backstory to how the Sherpas came to be in Darjeeling.
Yes. That was definitely the jumping point of the book, because that's why they're known. That's their identity, and always has been. The Climbing Sherpas of Darjeeling are an identity, are a community which is distinct from other Sherpas, which is distinct from this community is distinct from the Sherpas of Nepal. They're different and distinct from the Sherpas of Makalu. So definitely there are a few very interesting and unusual traits about this community. One is that almost uh, so the first set of Sherpas who came and settled in Tungsung, it was a single generation of Sherpas who climbed. The next generation lived, had moved on because their fathers had carried loads. They had made some money. They had tried to educate their children. The children started working in different fields. So there is this whole line that we have in the book. I climbed so that my children didn't have to. So there is no pride of passing on the profession to your child, as is in many other professions. Now again, even the younger people who are in Darjeeling today, who are climbing in Darjeeling today, are a single generation. They do not expect, and it's not across the board. There are sons of fathers who have climbed, who continue to climb, but overall this is a very unique characteristic of the Darjeeling Sherpa. And coming back to your question about it being the starting point or jumping off for our book, yes, definitely the fact that they climbed and the Westerners described them. We read, Deepa and I had read so many accounts in the Himalayan Journal, in different books from different libraries, unknown, known accounts. Some of them had names, maybe a first name of somebody. Some of them had no names. My Sherpa my porter, my coolie. That was how they were referred to, like my mule or my backpack or my climbing boots. It was all in the same language, the same narrative. So we wanted to draw this out, and some of them had a few things to say about his Sherpa, that he's very funny. He cracks up at the smallest joke, laughs out loud. He is really strong. He is very loyal. He's very honest. So these were certain adjectives attached to them, but you can attach the same adjectives to your mule, right? That he's strong, he's loyal, he's so. So who were these people they're talking about? We wanted to draw them out, and this was, Heather, you have to remember, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, uh, when this trend of writing about support staff was absolutely nowhere. It was not being talked about. These people were not. Now it just so happens that when we decided to write the book, many others did too. But they've written in the last 2 or 3 years, and even now are writing in the last 2, 3 years.
Yeah,
When we started, there was nobody who was
no.
at all interested in this lot of people.
So, and for me, I mean, you know, reading Headstrap, and it was the richness of the lives of the Sherpas in much more sort of wider ways to as we've seen so far, as you say, you know, other books, literature's changing now, increasingly becoming more diversified. We've got a bit of question later, you know, discussion later on about that. But you know, clearly, and Deepa, your intentions with Headstrap was to explore their lives and culture. I mean, did you find anything that, well, what, you know, can you just describe some of that richness for me, please, for people who, you know, haven't yet read the book? Deepa?
Okay. I think the first thing that we probably need to say is that it took a long time to get out many of the stories. We first needed, people don't automatically talk about themselves. So we first needed to establish a connection and also let people know that we were interested in their lives, because a lot of them were sort of, you know, why would you want to talk about me? Why would you want to talk about my father? And so it took time to establish those connections, and it took time for us to go again and again and again and start conversations about little things. We quickly learned that a list of questions that we had sort of developed were completely useless, and that we had to start off and first be trusted by people before they would come out with things. But then when they did, it was like this box being opened of and the funny thing is that when we have gone back now with the book to show to the Sherpas, there are more stories coming out.
Sure.
And Nandini and I were that day saying, why didn't you tell us this when we came all that time ago? And they're still wondering and saying, is this important? Is this something that you would like to hear? And so there were lots of little things like the women and the women's role when the men went off for the mountains, went off to the mountains for months at a time, because in those early days expeditions took 3 months, 4 months to complete. So the women talking about their lives and how they um, kept their families going and did work, and all the women worked. They were not only load carriers up to base camp, but also worked within Darjeeling, and there was no way of, no phones in those days to in order to communicate with your family. So you never knew whether the men were safe or not, whether they were coming home maimed or hurt or incapable of working for the future. So the women took up a lot of this, but there were also other little stories connected with, say, coin boxes that somebody had kept away, and out of that came photographs or medals or books, and the porter books that were given to the men, uh, um, to the porters, which recorded their climbs and which had comments by the leaders of various expeditions. The men couldn't read what they said, but they did know that it was communication from one white sub to another white sub, and therefore it was important to them. But you saw that after they finished their career, maybe the book would be used for other things, to keep little accounts, or to practice a little bit of English.
Okay.
So these were things that told us so much more about their lives and were just so rich and so wonderful.
Yes.
And they're still wondering why on earth we want to read all these things, or why we think that they're so precious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And like Deepa was saying, when we went back to Darjeeling, I mean, that's the other thing, that there are authors who have written a little bit on the Sherpas and other support staff in. But how many of them? I'm not trying to judge them, but the point is that these people were so moved that that we took the book back to them and showed them their photographs. Most of them can't read. They can't read English at all.
Yeah.
Some of them may be able to read Hindi or Nepali. But just leafing through the book and seeing their own photograph, I mean, why would anyone from Bombay come to their home to talk to them, to care about them, to publish their photograph? That's the limit of, they don't know that the story is there, and but even that means so much.
Yeah. I can only,
And it was
I
so
can
moving.
imagine. And you know what?
Yeah.
It's the because it's a fascinating read, and for me it does really show what has been missing from. We'll talk about this again a bit in a bit, but what has been missing from the literature, and just what a gap Headstrap fills, and to build the relationships with with the ships like you have. I can thank you.
Yeah.
As we're saying, there's so many rich stories in Headstrap, Nandini. But just to get for readers to get a feel for the stories, can you tell me which Sherpa story stood out for you, Nandini?
Heather, you're a writer too. You know how possessive all of us can get about our characters, and how they become part of our DNA, and how difficult it is to choose one from so many.
Yeah.
So Deepa and I constantly talk about this, and every time, and we are asked this question often, and we realize that many a times it changes for us.
Okay.
Because you know how the mind works differently at different times, and something calls out to you, shouts out to you in a different way. So currently, what has been talking to me a lot, and since I did the last book reading, is Tenzing's story. It is a known story. There are many unknown heroes in this book, but specifically Tenzing, because it is a kind. I mean, we had very little space to explore all the Sherpas. We covered many of them. So Tenzing is a chapter. There have been at least 6 books, whole books written by him, of him, about him. He is a chapter in many books in the world, but I think he is better explored. His complexities are more searingly honest in this book than any other account we've read. So much so that we have had a little bit of disappointment among his children, Norbu and Jamling, who have communicated to us that they're a bit upset um, about not necessarily only with us, but about the way their father was spoken about by the people we interviewed.
Okay.
But I think I think Tenzing was a great man. I think his story is sad in Headstrap, but also a recognition of his greatness as a human being. He was not just an icon. Every book makes him an icon, but we tried to make him human here.
Thank you. And thank you. And Deepa, have you any thoughts about, I mean, you know, as Nandini says, you know, particular characters, perhaps it's an unfair question, but just to give, you know, readers a sense, people who will be, should hopefully be reading this book, a sense of the characters in the book. Obviously, Tenzing's one. Do you have another that you can describe, please?
Well, I'll talk about an unknown woman, and this is her story. So her husband had gone off on an expedition. This must have been in the 30s or the 40s.
Sorry, do we have this in the book?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And there's so many stories now that sometimes we forget what's there and what isn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so she sent him a message that she was unwell. And the man who was on his expedition turned around and
dropped
everything and said he had to go home. And he made the journey, the return journey, which had taken about 5 days to do out. He did it in 2 days, and he rushed back home. And he entered the house to find her standing calmly in the kitchen and cooking a meal. So first, of course, he was absolutely relieved that she was okay, because the message seemed to be rather frantic and urgent to him. And he looked at her, and first he was relieved, and then he was really, really, really angry that she had caused him to feel all that panic and tension. And he started shouting at her, and he said something like, "You don't know what you've put me through, and you don't know what I've had to do to come here, and you don't know what I felt like when I heard that you were unwell." And she turned to him calmly and she said, "Now you know what I feel like every time you go on expedition." And he apparently never, ever, admonished her or shouted at her again for the feelings that she had. And, I think that really talks a lot about what the women go through when their husbands are off an expedition.
Yeah.
Now, and we were speaking to some modern Sherpas now, some modern climbers, and one of them said his daughter told us, she's about 18 years old and she's studying in college, and she said, "My father calls us every single day up to base camp, and he lets us know who are the people and what's happening, and we keep in touch. And then he says, I'm switching off the phone because I'm going up now." And she says, from that time till he comes back to base camp and calls and says he's all right. She says, that's all my mother and I can think about, hoping and praying that he's okay, that everybody else, every other Sherpa on the team is okay, that they will make the summit, and that they'll come back safe and sound. And these current climbers go on expeditions twice or thrice a year. In fact, her uncle, whom we had a conversation with and were to continue the conversation with, died on the very next expedition. So, yeah.
There was also the story about miscommunication, about a woman who heard from expeditions coming and going about her son dying. And she was really distraught. And then another expedition passed by saying her husband had died. And that was false information about the husband. The son had died. Yeah. And this woman was so distraught that she jumped off a bridge in her village and died. And her husband came home finding that his wife had died out of grief while he was still alive.
And right? Thinking that both her husband and son had died.
You know, such a desperately sad history, there, but one that, as you know, shows the richness of the book in this, because it shows the people in the lives behind the stories of the mountains and climbing the mountains and supporting the expeditions. So so thank you. Moving on to my next.
I think also because the feeling is that because the Sherpas are Buddhists and they have this attitude of the Buddhist way of thinking, looking at life, and they appear to take everything in their stride. They appear to put things down to karma. So the Western concept has been that the Buddhists do not value life as much as a Westerner does, because they think, oh, there's rebirth, and so this person is going to come back. And it's not true. Sorrow and love and grief and these are emotions that everybody feels, and because of a person's philosophy which helps them cope with the grief, doesn't mean that they feel those emotions any less.
No, thank you. Just moving to the next question. One of the things that really made me think when I was reading Headstrap, and you describe it, you outline it early in the book, was the way you described that you were collecting memories and not necessarily the full facts of history. And by that, because you were collecting memories, and memories can fade and also become embellished, not in an untruth kind of way, but just they become embellished over time, just as these things do. This helped me to see just what an important book Headstrap is, and also how over the past century or so, mountaineering literature has focused on the stories of the Western mountaineers. As we've been discussing, Headstrap and other books about expedition workers are beginning to fill this gap. But and we've talked about this gap already today. So Deepa, you were aware of this gap when you began this project, and I assume you could see it was so important to collect these missing stories and to fill in some of the gaps in the literature.
Want to talk about this? No. Yeah, I think that this was something that we realized once we started talking to people, that the memories were often at variance with the published facts or contemporary expedition records. People told us what they thought was important or what they remembered. They also, over the passage of time, as you said, embellished their memories, and they remembered things that may not have happened at all, or in the wrong year and the wrong place. And we did a lot of research. Every time somebody told us a story, we read about it, we went back to records, we went back to the Himalayan Journal and other things. And at some point we decided, we spoke about it amongst ourselves, and we said that what is important in this? And we decided that regardless of whether they were accurate or not, it was people's perceptions of what had happened to them or what had happened to their family members that was important. And that is what we had a duty to put forward without editorializing or without editing it in any way. Where the years were terribly wrong, or where they got people wrong, we would add it on as a sort of editorial comment and say that actually this happened in this year and this happened with these people. But as far as the memories were concerned, we would remain true to what was told to us, because that is what we needed to honor.
Yes, and facts about expedition, dates, descriptions of camps and camp life are there in the accounts. I mean, it is quite remarkable how detailed Western accounts are of what they did, and their diaries are very detailed. Absolutely hats off to the kind of information that you can get from these records. However, the emotions of, for want of a better word, culturally different people are completely missing. And that is something that we thought was important for us, because the facts and figures and elevations and what mountain is being climbed is all available. However, the sketching out of this character who was with them through that whole trip was completely missing. And I think at some point, Heather, we were stuck. We did uh, we did try very hard to match factual account and what we've heard.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're completely different.
Yeah.
And lots of gaps.
Yeah.
Lots of gaps in the memory.
Yeah.
So how do we weave it? That was something. And then we were talking to a friend, and she said, because she was also writing another kind of memoir for somebody, and she said, just just go with what you're listening to.
Yeah.
Go with that.
Yeah. And that, because, you know, for me, when reading the book, that richness shines through, and the way the stories are told. So as you say, Nandini, you know, of course there's facts in the book, and then most of it's but and there's so much more, in the sense of, this is my story, this is my life, this is, and that's not factual, but it's the richness around it that comes in that, and what it shows, which is quite different to a lot of mountaineering literature that we've read so far. And you know, in that sense, for me, it really did show us what we've been missing, you know, and which kind of brings me to my next question, really, because, and it's very related to what we've just been talking about, because Nandini, you know, as editor of the Himalayan Journal, you're playing an influential role in further filling these gaps, and you know, of course, with, you know, yourself, also with the journal's contributors, and with Deepa, you know, in this instance, you're helping to show and create new mountain literature. So my question for you, Nandini, is, you know, how do you
how lovely. Thank you.
you know, how do you see mountain literature continuing to evolve?
Heather, I'm not able to kind of predict, but I do think that a new mountain literature is becoming slightly more nuanced. It is talking about the marginalized. It's talking about the earth, and and the people who seem to be writing, creative mountain writing is on the rise. It's not only books, and I've been saying that for a long time, where the Himalayan Journal is concerned. I'm not interested in camp 1 to camp 2 to camp 3 to fixing ropes here and having 6 people there. I'm more interested in the narrative of what is your relationship with the mountain that you're climbing. It's really more important to approach the very subject differently. And also, in my case, specifically as editor of the journal, I'm struggling a lot with this, because I know that we have in the subcontinent, we have climbers and people who go to the mountains in different ways that have no English at all.
Okay.
And I'm unable to bring them into the mainstream, to kind of put them out there, to give them expression in my journal. I'm struggling with that. I'm trying and reducing the voice of the, you know, the Western people, because they have platforms.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a lot happening in the West, in the media. I mean, whether it's online magazines or journals or reports or books or publishing. But this subcontinent does not have access to that kind of media.
Yeah.
So I really feel it's important for different voices to be heard here in different ways.
Yeah, and mind you, there are people who write in their own language.
Yes.
So if you see Bengali mountain literature, so
Yep.
there are many climbers from West Bengal who do it, and they do write, and they are there's some wonderful mountain literature in Bengali. And the
Okay.
same thing is of Maharashtra, the state that we live in now. In Marathi, there are people who write beautifully lyrical explanations and stories about their relationships with the mountains, but for Nandini to use them, they have to be translated, which is another issue
I
altogether.
mean, we have how many languages in India? 50 or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that is.
So, I mean, and that's because, I mean, in my own, I mean, I've been working with Nandini for a while now in different, guest editing the Himalayan Journal. That was a real honour and a great experience. And that has really helped me to see what you're, I mean, things only to a degree, because, I'm very, Headstrap's in English, so I can read it. And that in itself has connotation for history, that we won't go to now, but that there's reasons for that. But it would be wonderful. I mean, just you talking about that, it would be wonderful, because I could just imagine what's in that literature you've just been talking about, much more spiritual work in many ways. And I would love to read that in the same, in the ways I've really enjoyed reading Headstrap. So it's got me thinking about how yes, thank you. That's, but it's really important for, to be talking about this, I think, because the thing is, just what the mountain literature is, and what we've seen, and actually we've only seen a part of it, and it's been wonderful to talk to you about this, because hopefully it will help people to think about that the wider literature there is out there, and what it's sort of, how it's changing. So thank you. That's the end of my questions. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Deepa or Nandini?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think one of the things is, and it really emerges out of this conversation that we've just had, and it's about accessibility of the material to people. And one of the things that we are extremely, or rather two things. One is to get an audio book made of this in Nepali, so that people can hear the stories that they have no access to right now, particularly all our Sherpa friends, to be able to listen to what is said about them. So that's something that we hopefully will
we are
be
looking
able to,
for funds,
we will
because
look
we
for-
have to get it translated into Nepali and then have a production of the audiobook.
So that is one thing that we're doing.
So if there are any ideas from the people who
Yeah.
watch this, it'll be great to know.
And the second thing is, during the course of our when we went in 2012, a lot of the Sherpas that were being spoken about had passed away, and we kept saying to each other, we've come 20 years too late. If we had started this project 20 years earlier, we would have met so many more people who've just passed away. And during the 10 years of the making of the book, another 10 people that we spoke to actually passed away. So it was the last interviews that at least 10 people gave before they died, the last photographs of at least 10 people. And since then, to the bringing out of the book, this time when we went to Darjeeling, we were recalling all the people who passed away in the interim, in the 2 years that 2 years that it's taken to publish the book, and we counted 12 people. So there
COVID
are so
took many lives in
COVID
Darjeeling.
took many lives. So what we have really is an archive of material that is invaluable.
Yep.
Quite apart from, and we have over 150 interviews. We have we have much more information than we were actually able to put into the book. So the second thing that we're really, really keen on doing is finding a way to eternalize and digitize all the material so that it's accessible to other scholars, to family members who want to access the recordings, to researchers and scholars who want to know more about the Sherpas. And that is also something that we're looking at doing, because the book was one part of it. We know that we're going to continue going back to Darjeeling and continue our relationship with the people there. And so we want to be able to make sure that the things that we've learned and heard are preserved for others.
So that's the other hope that we have, that somebody will take this on.
Sure. Okay. So digital preservation of the material.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, yes.
So I think
that's it.
I mean, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for talking with me today. I'm just going to show the book again. It's available on Little Peak Press and around the world now in different. It's available in the UK at Little Peak Press on our website. And I can, it's a brilliant read. I really enjoyed and valued reading it. So obviously, from me, it comes highly recommended. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you so much, Nandini, for talking with me today, and thank you for for what you've done here. It's obviously the extent to which you've worked on this project and are continuing to do so. I think it's so very important, and it's so very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much for your kind
talking
words also about our book.
Yeah.
It's really gratifying. Thank you.